It's always a pleasure to be here. I've been, as I said, as Clay said, I've been here many times. I just thought I'd give this talk in honor of James Tong. Because I'm going to cry, because we were graduate students together in the same cohort out of the University of Michigan, and he taught at UCLA for many, many, many years, and he died in the past year, and he was a terrific guy. Okay, so the brain drain, right? So the brain drain's a big problem, right? Lots of countries suffer from it. Interestingly, China's not the worst. Actually, India has a worse brain drain. If you consider talent as some college education, these numbers are some college education, India actually does worse. But the real loss is the high talent, the quality, PhDs primarily. The Center for Strategic and Emerging Technologies, a conservative think tank at Georgetown, estimate that 90% of Chinese in AI have actually stayed in the US. But I've got data to show you that the numbers who have gone back in other fields has been increasing. And that's this table here. So you can see the change from 2001, 98% of Chinese who got a PhD in the United States, that 5 years later, they were still in the United States. So that's the best indicator we have for those. They could leave afterwards, but we don't know. You can see that it's now, in 2017, down to 83%, which is still remarkably high, right? And I'm Canadian, and I'm a brain drain, right? I'm in that 55 percentile. Now, what do you do when these people don't come back? So one of the strategies that has been suggested is what's called the diaspora option. Many of you may not know the word diaspora. Diaspora means your citizens living overseas. So as Clay was saying, the strategy is you don't have to bring them back permanently. You just want to know what they know, right? And get them to share their knowledge with you, okay? So that's the key strategy. Right, and there's all kinds of players and all kinds of ways that this can be done. I'm not going to go into detail. You can read it just as fast as I say it. Now, so who are this new diaspora, right? How big are they? How good are they, right? So the Ministry of Education estimates that there are about 2.2 million former Chinese students who are living abroad, of which 670,000 are in the US. So that's a lot, right? And if you Google any major field in the United States, and I just Googled material science, right? 4 of the 5 top people in material science are PRC-born scientists in the US, and something like 5 of the top 10, right? And you can do this for many, many fields. Right? National Science Foundation reports that there are 100,000 mainland-born, PRC-born people in the United States with a PhD, right? So that's 670,000 of those, 100,000 have a PhD, right? So China began to pay attention to this. They didn't know the idea of the diaspora option as a sort of a construct to try and bring people back. But the first program was the Bairenjihua, right? The 100 Talents program from the Keshuiyuan, right? From the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And the problem was, for them, they did, and this is very important, part-time versus full-time programs, right? I'll talk more about the difference between them, but you go back full-time, you bring back what you know. You're using Chinese money when you do your research back in China. America doesn't like it, tough, right? But if you're staying in America and you're getting American money, and then you're doing research, and then sharing that information, high-level information, back to China, that's where the problem emerges, right? And that's where the Americans don't like that in particular. But the strategy, Jiang Zemin called on people to return. And then in 2001, the main document passed in 2001 was basically saying we have a China, we want a diaspora option. 为国服务，不一定回国服务. You don't necessarily have to come back, but just serve the motherland, right? Serve the motherland, right? So, how do you serve the motherland? This document had 7 ways, and China has utilized, or Chinese have utilized most of these. Use your professional associations, right? So you get, all the people in Silicon Valley who do high tech, they would have an association, right? So you want to get them to help. Concurrent positions in the West and in China. And I'll show you some data from 2021 as to like 35% of mainland professors have a joint position back in China, right? Cooperative research, teach, set up enterprises. So that's something too, 企业家, they can go back and set up a factory, right? And then those are the key things, right? And you can read the rest. And when encouraged to do this, mainland born professors got on board, why not? Some China, I'll talk a little bit later about why I think they got on board, what motivated them, but these are part of some of the strategies that have been used. One was called the Home Program, and it was the China Association for Science and Technology, CAST, with the Renshibu, with the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security, and the organization department of the CCP. So that's the Zuzhibu, right? So that's where the party got involved in this. Right around 2003 is when the party, the Zuzhibu, starts to get involved with this. But as of 2017, they had held 1,000 meetings, 1,000 contracts, negotiated 6,000 projects, and 21.4% of those projects had gone back to China, right? So the technology has gone, right? Another case is the Chunhui Cup, right? The Chunhui Bay. And these are people I used to work very closely with this organization, the Liuxue Fu Zhongxin, in China. They're situated next to the Beijing Yuyan, what was it? It's Beijing Wenhua Yuyan Daxue, right? And by 2019, they had already listed all 301 projects. People would come back to China. They'd often get together with companies and maybe set up a patent, get their product bought by these companies in automation, new materials, new energy, and biotech. 17% relocated back to China, right? And by 2023, 3,500 excellent projects. A really interesting project is the 111. The 111 project, also called Introducing Discipline-Based Talent to Universities, launched by SAFIA, which is the Zhuanjiaju, right, and the Ministry of Education. Now, the plan was to establish 100 innovative centers, right, bases at China's top universities, and link them up with top universities in the West. From those universities, from each university overseas, get 10 of the best talent. Most of them, I'm sure, were PRC-born scholars, right? And by the end, they had 143 bases, 17 universities, right? Each base received $270,000 for annually, right? And China put $90 million into the project. Now that's where it really becomes a problem is when the hawks in the US take a look at this program. And this is one of the more hawkish guys, and these two are pretty hawkish on China. And so I actually used their work. You know, I'm too soft. I'm a panda hugger, right? So I figured I'd check out their work, right? And what did they find? They found that the bases at Beihang, right, which is a PLA-linked university, right? It's not under the PLA, but it's PLA-linked university, 2 bases, aerospace and aerospace propulsion and advanced materials. That's pretty high-tech stuff with defense-related capabilities. The one I love is Harbin Gongye Daxue, which is clearly very closely tied to the PLA, and they had a program on advanced ceramics. What do you do with advanced ceramics? Is not that you're going to make a nice pot, right? There is an institute for advanced ceramics at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and what is that for? That's for listening to American submarines in the South China Sea, basically. You know, the advanced ceramics, that's what it's used for picking up these kinds of stuff. So these 2 schools, in fact, their students are no longer allowed into the United States. If you went to any of those schools, you are not allowed now to get a visa to study in the United States. So now let's get to the individual programs, right? These were all sort of group programs. I'll give you one more group program later. But individual programs, I gave Li Yuanchao, right? 我给他一个报告, right? I gave him a talk. And the topic of the talk was 为什么千人计划失败了? Right? Why is the 1,000 Talents plan failing? And I said to him, it's failing because 官员的权力太大, right? So if you're sitting there, do you want to go back? Well, you don't want to go back because 官员的权力太大, right? The bureaucrats have too much power. Li Yuanchao turns to the president of Dalian Ligong Daxue and says, 这个外国人说你的权力很大，你同意不同意? Right? So he turns to the president of Ligong Daxue, Dalian Ligong Daxue, and says, this foreigner says that you have too much power. What do you think? And then they got into a real pissing contest, what we would call in English a real pissing contest. And the guy was fired 4 months later. Because he was known, as far as I'm concerned, he was known to be an opponent. And so he was invited to this meeting, and it was a setup. I was being used in part. They knew what I would say, and so he was set up, and they got him. Now, Li Yuanchao believed that he could use the CCP to dongyuan, to mobilize the people to come back, right? A lot of people were not coming back. He wanted to mobilize it, so he did a major campaign in the fall of 2009. Wang Huiyao, a good friend of mine, his book called The Talent War was must-reading material for government officials, mayors, vice mayors, all over China, and they were all under enormous pressure to bring people back full-time. And if you could bring people back full-time, you might get, your university would get money. I know that Tianjin Daxue, Tianjin University, got 10 million renminbi for bringing back one person full-time. So there's a lot of money under this program, right? Now, but the majority still joined part-time, even though he thought that he could mobilize people to come full-time. He couldn't do it. That was the Shirbaila. And the data, so you can see full-time, 26% came back full-time, 74% joined the program part-time. So that meant that they stayed overseas, but became a qianren, right? And would get some money, not as much as if they went back, but they could get access to a laboratory, they could get research assistance, they were, and it was a glorious thing in China to be a Chenren. I remember back in these early days, if you saw I met a Chenren who was an entrepreneur, and he'd walk into a room and people would go, wow, that's your Chenren, right? I remember those kinds of things, and you can see the entrepreneurs, 90% went back, because if you didn't go back, you set up a factory and didn't go back, your brother-in-law would steal your factory, right? He'd take your technology, right? But this is the policy that really is the source, the original source of US-China problems. The part-time 1,000 talents, that was the target of the China Initiative. Here you can see, this is the data that I have on the 1,000 talents. The estimates are that it got up to about 7,000 people, and that there were something like 3,000 in the US, right? But you can see, and the Young Talent Program, 3,500, right? So now the other professionals, so Fedesiak and Weinstein, these are two more people at SACET, at this Georgetown University Center. They did a paper, they collected data on 208 Chinese professional associations across 21 countries. I actually was a blind referee for this paper and pushed them to actually show the data. They speculated about, this exists, therefore all this stuff is going on, right? But you can see the countries, you can see the associations, 126 associations. 49% of them said on their website that they were exchanging technical information with China, but they didn't put it in English, right? So why didn't they put it in English? Because they didn't want the foreigners to know that these associations are passing back that much information, right? And these associations are bringing technology back to China. Now, here's the major programs. This is the slide I mentioned to you. So this is a special, you're seeing something special. As far as I know, this is the best collection of all the programs. The right-hand column saying participants, right? I showed this at a seminar at Beida. It was a closed seminar, right? And when the people in the audience, including Wang Jisi was there, if you know the name, a major specialist on US-China relations, a professor from the University of International Relations. She looked at this and she said, Hemingan, right? Very sensitive, right? And I tried to show this to Wang Huiyao's association when I gave a talk, not a chance, right? Because China doesn't even want to talk about the Chenren, right? As far as they're concerned, it never happened, right? So you can see all of these. This is the leadership, the Zhongyang Lingdao Xiaozu, right? The Rencai Lingdao Xiaozu, right? So that's the talent, right? And so you can see them, right? This is a lot. This sort of freaked everybody out when I showed this at Peking University, right? These are the sources, so they're all legit. So the U.S. attacked the 1,000 Talents program, and China said, okay, we're closing it down. And then they turned around and reestablished it. Same organizations under a different name. So the same categories, entrepreneurs, part-time returnees, full-time returnees, Young 1,000 Talents program, right? So all of these were resurrected. How extensive is the engagement? So this was a study, a former MPhil student of mine, a guy named Kang Soo Chin. We collected data. The strategy was 18 US universities, 4 UK, 3 Canada, 2 in Australia, took to 27 universities, found 1,000 Chinese scholars, mainland scholars. Very easy to find, right? Pinyin names, right? Very easy to find them, just using the pinyin names. And then we found in the end, we got data on 121 of them, 43, so let's see, here's the percentages, right? So the last column is the percentages. 43 reported joining a program, so you're still talking 30%, 35% joined a program. Lab directors, 6% of them were running a lab back in China, right? Which probably was the same as the lab that they were running overseas, right? Joint positions, 35%, talks, whatever, just the rest is sort of your good engagement. Now, why join a program? My answer is to help China. By and large, my view is, and you can see all these quotes, there's been a group of mainland PhD students in Australia, in Canada, in the US. They've been doing research on these projects, and so I've looked at their dissertations and I stole the quotes, right? But I give them credit, right? And you can just see, it's the emotion from the bottom. Now we want to do something for China. It's the emotion from the bottom of my heart. I lived in China for 30 years. I owe China so much and think it's my obligation to repay this to the best of my ability, right? A colleague at HKUST in 2002 said, look, I've been overseas. I got all these benefits. He was a Chinese Academy of Science professor, right? And he said, look, we got to help China, right? And here's some more quotes, right? No matter if one stays or returns, you can't get rid of your Chinese roots. A really good article by Jin, Rousseau, Suttmeyer, and Cao, The Role in Ethnic Chinese in International Collaboration. Chinese scientists leaving China are certainly influenced by Chinese traditional culture, write the same language, have close social relations. These factors have constructed a social basis binding overseas Chinese to a China with which they share many characteristics. So I'm sure most of you feel this way, but a sense of being Chinese. So there's a sense of still being Chinese and a desire to give something back to your Zuguo, right? And it's, as I would say, it's not strange for diasporas to try and help their motherland. I'll comment on that at the end. So this was a study we did in 2004 and 5 online, and you can see that improve the quality of research in China was the dominant expression or reason for PRC professors in the US, Canada, and Hong Kong. I get a kick out of the making China stronger. People in Hong Kong did not feel that strongly about that. Maybe they knew something was coming. Anyway, so those are the reasons, right? Here's some of the incentives. Pretty good. In particular, the second category, the new Chinese Academy of Sciences, you get $1 million US if you're a senior scholar and you go back, right? They brought out that because they weren't getting people to come back. And Xi Jinping went to the Chinese Academy of Sciences and, as we would say, I don't know if I can use bad language, gave him shit. Just basically said, you guys just aren't doing your job. You're not getting people back. The Chinese Academy of Sciences is not fulfilling the role it's supposed to be fulfilling. And so they found the money and put together this package, the top one, to get people to come back. Part-timers get less. Now, it's very important to remember this when you think about mainland professors, particularly in the field of cancer research. And about 30%, maybe 40% of the mainland professors, the PRC-born professors in the United States are doing biotech, some often related directly to cancer. And so I've often paid attention to this, right? And Collins, Francis Collins, who was the head of the NIH, which is the main funder of cancer research in the United States, They talked about cancer research across borders under Obama, right? A lot of money. Even in 2015, 3 years before the China initiative begins, the United States government is renewing its project and basically saying to mainland professors or PRC-born professors, let's work on cancer, right? We want you to do it. We'll give you money. We'll put the money into this, right? And so both sides contributed a lot of money. President Xi, I like to call him General Secretary Xi, it's really more meaningful. It really reflects his power. He makes a statement which I think is really stupid, right? You don't say, where I can find it, that the China-born Chinese in the diaspora are a focal point of the Tongjian work. Basically, that means that the Tongjianbu, right, the United Front department under the CCP are here, right? They're out in the world looking for mainland-born Chinese and working with them. I don't think you want to tell the West, right, that that's happening. But there are other aspects, like the securitization, but then you have to remember, I mean, people criticize China for it, but it's worth remembering that Snowden, who was busted, or who sort of reported, told the Chinese government, told the world that basically the United States was bugging every phone in China, right? That they were doing that. So Xi Jinping might say, I need to protect myself, right? But you can see all these quotes, right? You 不求所有，但求所用；不求所在，但求所谓. So you don't necessarily need everybody, you don't necessarily need everything, but you want to get what you want to get. So I often say Xi Jinping wants to know everything that every PRC-born professor in the United States knows, if he can get his hands on it, right? Mobilizing talent, bringing that back. So offshore innovation in foreign countries, which means that companies that are overseas, let's say in San Diego, where there is one of these centers, they're doing research, PRC businessmen are doing research, and China wants them to bring those products of their technology back to China and set up factories in China. The other thing that's worth noting is the Chaoban. If you know the Chaoban, the Chinese Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, they were pretty nice guys. I worked with them all the time. I gave them talks. They invited me to when I was living in Hong Kong, they invited me to National Day in Beijing. They don't exist anymore. They have now under the control of the Tongjianbu, right? So they have been moved. And the Tongjianbu, the people in the Tongjianbu may still be saying that they're working for the Chaoban, but they're not, right? So they are part of the Chinese Communist Party working here, all around. Now, I decided to put up an American flag. Normally, I'm Canadian, you know, as I would say in Cantonese, "Wohai Ganadaren," right? So the US was first worried about the Thousand Talents program, right? And the FBI warned, I saw the memo, FBI put out a warning in 2015, watch it, right? Thousand Talents program, it's a way that China is trying to steal your technology. But even before that, Xi Xiaoxing, who you said has been here, in some ways the poster child of this whole China initiative, right? His case, 2014, very early on, right? What happens to him? One day, the door of his house gets kicked in. He's a professor at Temple. The door of his house gets kicked in. Guys come in with guns, right? He's telling his wife, do what they say or they'll shoot me, right? They arrest him, take him away. 4 months later, drop all charges, right? He has since won the Sakharov Prize for human rights, right? So they had nothing. And how they got to him, right, is the line, his collaborations with China had been discovered through section, is it 402 or 702, I think, of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Under that act, under that 702 or 402, the United States hacks 1.8 billion emails a month. And then using big data, looks for keywords. And then once they get the keywords, on the Chinese side, they can see who they're collaborating with and then investigate those people without having to get a court order. Normally, you want to tap a phone in the United States, the FBI, I believe, has to go to the courts and get permission to do it. You don't have to do it if you use this strategy. So it's if you now the FBI wants to renew it. The House wants to renew it, and this is, in fact, the reason that mainland scholars, I believe, don't want to collaborate. Mainland scholars here don't want to collaborate back with China. You collaborate, they'll find you. Even if it's not so nasty stuff, they'll investigate you, right? They may tell your university. They're going to make your life very uncomfortable. And I believe that that's the strategy. I'll jump ahead. I believe it is the strategy. The strategy is to disrupt the flow of technology from the United States to China. And if it involves scaring the shit out of people, they're going to do it, right? The FBI is more than willing to do it, right? So I'll just move on. Trump made it different. China is not very popular in the United States. So this did not fall on unhappy people. Sorry to the mainland students who are here, right? The Americans don't really trust you very much. The numbers have gone. Much worse. It's even got worse than then. Okay, well, this is 2020, right? So this is a problem, right? This is racism, all the kinds of things. Trump, this is the China virus, right? I actually have the book. If any of you are interested, there's a book by Young Dali Young, University of Chicago, on Wuhan. And he has it cold. He can tell you the story amazingly well. He's a fantastic professor, Princeton PhD, really top-notch. Anyway, this is just a table to show that the 1,000 talents were predominantly working in the United States, right? So workplace, the US, 68.7%. They got PhDs in the US, but it's the main place. People will get a PhD in Europe, they'll come here, right? So that's, now, this sort of tracks the step-by-step process of how the China Initiative comes to sort of into existence. And the guy who's really responsible for a lot of this is FBI Director Wray, right? And he uses language like non-traditional collectors. You didn't know you were a spy, did you? Right? He's saying basically all Chinese students in America are spies. This is the head of the FBI, right? That's pretty scary, right? Pretty scary. And he continues to say it. He makes a comment to the Council on Foreign Relations in 2020 after Biden wins. And he still says that they're spies, right? Now, the theory was the 1,000 grains of sand, that China has a strategy, the security, the intelligence organizations in China, they'll just get one little piece here, one little piece there, a piece of sand there, and they'll build this big picture, and that's their strategy. Someone who worked for the FBI called that the 1,000 grains of sand. He has since said, it's not true. He's rescinded that, right? But the FBI still believes it, right? The National Intelligence Council here said in 2018 that there were 2,700 people, 1,000 talents, 44% in life sciences. So that's the cancer team, right? The other ones are much more sensitive. Industrial technology, that'll be related to 中国制造2025年, made in China 2025, right? So the other ones you can be more worried about. Now, the FBI then went to the NIH. The NIH is the main funder of cancer research and said, look into this. We think there's a problem. The NIH looks at the articles using big data. Well, first they use small data. They just have a team in the NIH looking at articles. And what they find is many mainland professors working in the United States don't list their US university on either their publications. When they do a grant proposal, they don't mention that they got money from China. And these are things that the guy running the NIH program really hated. This really got him going. Or they could have two jobs, right? These are called double dipping. You dip twice, right? So these were serious problems. Collins switches sides, right? He writes a letter to 10,000 universities saying, we have a problem, right? And all of a sudden, the NIH articles that said there's great collaboration, they drop off the web, right? Sessions finally announces the China Initiative in 2018. The key tasks, identifying priority trade secret theft cases. They have found none under the 1,000 Talents program, none, right? Ensure that investigations are adequately resourced. They are. Bring them to fruition in a timely manner. They haven't. And according to the facts and applicable law, the FBI has lied in court about some of the work that they've done, blaming Chinese scholars. Now, again, the non-traditional collectors, right, that are being co-opted. And what's worse is administrators at US universities are to be trained in how to find the spies, right? So that's basically the either department heads or the vice presidents for research and development, right, who get very involved in this. This, I believe, for those of you mainland students, you may not, I mean, you've heard of McCarthyism, right? In the 1950s, there was a Red Scare in America where hundreds of people were, not that many in the end were arrested or fired, but it was really a very scary time for anybody who had ever had any kind of leftist leanings in the 30s and 40s, and many of them got into trouble, right? And it's like the McCarthyism, an enemy from within, right? That's a big one, right? Your enemy is right in here, right? And it's linked to a foreign power. The universities didn't protect their their faculty. They fired lots of them without ever giving them a fair hearing, right? Guilt by association. But I also say this is very much like a Yundong, right? Like a Maoist campaign, right? Top down, external, internal threats, quotas, right? Stan, at lunch, we were saying, you know, that's what China had always said. Mao Zedong said 5% of all Chinese people are bad. So when you have the anti-rightist campaign in 1957, every unit in China had to find 5% of the people in their unit being bad, right? 10% in many places. And many of these people wound up in labor camps, right? So your grandparents, some of you, your grandparents wind up. Now, very much, you know, a China strategy, 杀鸡儆猴, right? Kill the chicken, right? Scare the monkey. Again, a demonstration effect that they wanted to do. And here's a quote from an FBI official: maybe next time an academic at an institution thinks twice or thinks a little bit harder about their collaboration with a Chinese institution and what the motivations of the Chinese institution might be. In other words, don't collaborate, right? The warnings are there. Don't collaborate, right? Because that's the strategy, right? Mike German, who I've talked to several times, an ex-FBI agent, he says, and he wrote a book after 9/11 and talked about racism in the FBI and racial profiling in the FBI towards Muslim Americans. And he has now spoken out on the racial profiling of Chinese Americans. He said that the FBI may not care if they really could arrest people or find them guilty. What they wanted to do was disrupt. That's the name of he wrote a book, and in the title there is the word disrupt. So stop that flow, right? That's the strategy, right? Now, in the last slide, the last point, there was a famous case, Anming Hu, or Hu Anming, right? He lost his job, University of Tennessee, we think, lost his job because an FBI agent said that he was working with the PLA. Then he went to trial. And in the trial, the FBI agent said, "Oh, I lied." Right? He lied. He made it up. He had no data. He had no proof. Hu Anming got fired. Is still be fighting to try and get his job. I think they gave him his job back because it was such a blatant example of and why did the FBI agent do it? Quotas. Demers, who spoke here, has admitted to the American press that he actually sent out a message that every FBI outpost, every FBI station in the United States was supposed to find a spy. And if you couldn't find it the first year, find it the second year, right? So again, it's very Maoist. This is I wound up being at a conference where the US government presented the support for the China initiative. Ray, the FBI director, has this big board, right? This big x-axis, y-axis, and showing that the number of cases that they're busting, right? In fact, he was saying every 10 hours, we're finding somebody, right? So there's this huge axis, sort of looking almost, exponential growth, but there's no numbers on the left axis. There's no dates on the y-axis. So he's not giving us real information. He's just trying to scare everybody. And I howled when I saw that, but also got very annoyed. So here, even after Biden's inauguration, Ray told the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the most influential foreign policy organization in the United States, right? They publish foreign affairs, that China's intelligence services, its state-owned enterprises, its ostensibly, that means so-called, right, private enterprises, and 130,000 Chinese graduate students and researchers who work and study in the US every year are all in on it, right? They're all in on it, right? Pretty nasty stuff. So the NSF sets up an organization to investigate this, but the real investigation comes from the NIH, its own mini China initiative. And you can quote, if you look at the third bullet point, the head of the program investigating this says basically, I want to clean the NIH ecosystem of all 1,000 Talents participants. Now, a lot of people joined the 1,000 Talents program in 2011, 2012, long before Xi Jinping, right? And they joined it part-time. And all of a sudden, they're suspect, right? Now, again, the guy doing this, he went around to universities and he said, if you don't fire this guy, who is a 1,000 Talents person, we will stop NIH money to your university. And at the University of North Carolina, that was about $1 billion, right? That's heavy. right? Right, so here's the final findings that this NIH mini China series, China initiative came up with, a total of 246 people. Not a lot, given the fact that there's at least 15,000 mainland professors in good positions, mainland-born professors in the United States. So undisclosed affiliation, so that they were a member of the 1,000 Talents, didn't say it, right? Undisclosed grants, that they got money from China, didn't disclose it, right? Termination or resignation, 103 people were either terminated or quit, right? So that's about the same as McCarthy, right? And compliance review remains open. This is as of 2022. 4 years after the program begins, there's still 57% of these cases were still open, right? So you're living in torture, right? Are you going to get fired, right? Are you going to get in trouble? Right? So universities respond two ways. Some universities said, no, these people couldn't do it. Then the NIH showed them published articles where their university was not mentioned when their professor published an article, but some of them, because of the pressure from the NIH, went after their guys. I'll show you a case in a minute. But other universities were pretty protective. This is a list of universities, and MIT was the heroic one, because when Chen Gang, a senior MIT professor, was stopped at the airport, investigated, threatened, MIT president hired a lawyer for him. It's the only case I know of where the university did that. Now, two case studies, Huan Transheng. Now, I was an expert witness in this case, all right? This is one of the reasons I have some inside scoop, right? I wrote a report for his case. And this is a guy who joined the 1,000 Talents program in 2011. He was approached by a colleague that he had known and said, let us use your name, right? Say that you're going to join the 1,000 Talents, because if we use your name and you're overseas, we're going to get money from the organization department of the Communist Party. And we want that money. And all over China, right? Remember, Li Yuanchao was mobilizing people to do this, right? So this, all the universities are doing this kind of stuff, right? So he agrees, foolishly. He agrees. He does get a benefit. The benefit is that he gets research assistance for his laboratory, and he gets it for free. So 5 hospitals in China are sending him research assistance that he doesn't have to pay for, but NYU, New York University, clearly knows they got to be coming. I mean, there's no way that they don't know that these people are coming and should know the terms of the agreement, right? Anyway, he had raised $150 million for NYU. Major cancer researcher. So here's a guy, however he got the assistance, was running a very effective lab in the United States, right? Now, at a closed hearing, adjudicated by a panel of faculty from other schools in the university, they recommended that he be terminated. Basically, he was fired. What had he done that was so bad, right? And I contacted him. His career was over, right? Because he went back to China, couldn't find it. No way he'd find a job in the US. Second case is a guy named Simon Ng. Now, if you know your Asian information, Ng is not a Mandarin name. It's Kotian Wu, right? It's Wu, right? But he's Malaysian, right? He says he can't even read Chinese, right? He gets approached by a guy a mainland professor in the mainland who had tried to get the 1,000 Talents program, couldn't get it, then gets this guy to let him use his name and says that he's a specialist in this, and this, which he wasn't. But those were the skills that the professor who had asked him to join had. He gets investigated, right? And he's charged with 59 felonies, right? I can go into more detail about them. The one that I loved was that he used fraudulent passports. Why? Because he used a Malaysian passport, his name was N. If he used an American passport, his name might have been Wu, W-O-O, right? So the FBI decided he must be doing something wrong. His one mistake was when he was interviewed by the FBI, he lied. They asked him, do you have patents in China? He could have been scared, right? What are they going to do to me? No, I don't have any patents. Lying to the FBI is a federal offense. He spent 8 months in prison, right? He made a plea deal. He made the deal because they had him, right? His career's over, right? He's done, right? I'm going to skip there is a degree of racism in this, right? People say this is criminalizing what was previously acceptable. A woman, Carol Lamb, in California here, warned about FBI initiatives because the FBI loves initiatives. They get lots of money and they can go out and get people, right? So they really like to do these. So what's the impact? Well, the impact as of 2022 is number of mainland students coming to the United States has decreased. This is kind of post-COVID, while you can see that Indians are coming in larger numbers, right? Second is people going back, really talented people going back. This is work by Xie at Princeton. They do big data, right? It's another study using big data. And they find these people, like all of a sudden 1,490 people who had previously been listed as their home unit being, somewhere in the US, now we're listing only China. I said to CAU, well, maybe they're just lying. And he said, no, we don't think that there's very many of them doing that, right? Other countries surpass US in attracting published scientists. China and all of the countries in the OECD. The OECD are the 15 top industrial countries in the world. So everybody's beaten the US, right? So conclusion. If you listen carefully, I give shit to both sides, right? Xi Jinping went way over the top. Getting all this information put these scholars at risk, right? He never stopped and said, am I putting these people at risk by asking them to do this, right? It's as if he didn't care, right? So they all get in trouble, right? And you can see it's a security dilemma of scientific research, right? The Americans are going to get really nervous about this, right? Especially if you say that you're going to use a united front strategy, right? And so these tech transfers, collaborative research, scientific interdependence becomes national security issue. The Chinese side was responsible for that. But these guys got caught in the middle. Many of these people got caught in the middle. The United States should have just kept this to national security issues, what's called dual-use technology. So when I gave you the list of the 3,000 mainland professors in the United States, 45% of them were doing cancer. So the NIH should never have gotten, in my view, should never have gotten as involved in as they did. Lots of people lost jobs. And NYU actually fired 3 PRC-born professors from the medical school, right? The strategy is higher walls, smaller fields, right? So make it more smaller and go after, protect the United States has a right to protect itself. It's got a challenger. China is definitely a challenger. There is a tech war going on. The United States, even though I'm Canadian, has the right to protect its own interests. I think it has a right to protect its own in high tech. But how do you do it? Who do you go after? How do you stop this process? And I would argue that, in fact, it is a strategy to disrupt it. The United States overreacted. The China initiative is an overreaction. It's got racist overtones. It became some human rights violations. Many innocent people who just wanted to, one, you could say, follow the lead of the US and China doing cancer research, right? And second is, how can you not ask diasporas to help, their homeland, right? I mean, many diasporas are very helpful. The Jewish diaspora, the Irish diaspora, the Turkish diaspora, the Indian diaspora, right? Right near here, right? The Indians are one of the most helpful diasporas in the world, helping India develop. So that's my story.